Artist, our guest artist for the day, Bryan Moss. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Take it away.
All right. So first I'll start off by telling a little bit about myself, and I'll be doing that by painting and talking at the same time, which is a talent within itself. So what we're going to paint today is just a portrait, but the special thing we're going to do with it is that we're going to use different type of media. So I have some oil pastel, some marker, and then obviously acrylic paint. I'll also be exploring and showing some other techniques, and the goal for today isn't necessarily to execute a final painting or a final product, but it's more so to show you how malleable the process can be, and that if you make a mark, you don't have to commit to it, that you can change that. First, though, you'll see me drawing. I'm going to start, we call it activating the canvas, and we're going to do that just by creating marks, compositional marks, which the process I use is kind of creating a triangle. So, triangulation. So if you can see that, so we're just going to use a shape that simple, which just creates counterbalance. So you have a nice point here, down to here. You can already start to probably see the portrait. I can elusively draw it for you here, the shape, so that for my viewers at home, they're like, oh, he's crazy, there's nothing there. So now there's something there, okay? But I'm going to walk you through every step. Okay, so we're starting out with oil pastel, like I said, regular pastel.
So you're telling me you actually
pastel.
look at that and you see something?
Yeah, okay, Ben, do you see anything?
No.
Really?
And it's a huge frustration of mine that I can't draw people because I see them I used to see them every day.
Right, fair enough. I as well.
All right, this is already fascinating for me.
Okay, cool. So the way that I would go about showing this, Ben, would be, so you could start creating shapes, right? Now it doesn't have to represent anything, because what you're trying to find before you paint is how to, get something on this canvas and also get comfortable with the material. So it's not about producing a piece of work at this point, okay? So, because a lot of times when people paint, what they do, they see this blank canvas and then they become intimidated. They're like, oh my gosh, everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be, if you put a mark there, you can't erase it, So you can kind of sketch out an idea. So this would represent, and trust me, I'll show you. So this will represent the head right here. Let's see if we can get a face in there. So Ben, can you start seeing a bit of a face here?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll give you guys a little bit of a background about myself. So I grew up, born and raised on the south side of Columbus, Ohio. Graduated from South High School, if anyone's familiar with that place. And I started as an artist all the way back when I was roughly 6 years old. I was a latchkey kid, and what happened was that I started taking art classes at Schiller Park, which is in German Village, if anyone's familiar. Okay, real quick, guys. So I have a sketch laid out, and like I said, this is mixed with oil pastels, which is, one is water soluble, so you'll see real quick. So you can see that the blue moves, it's active, whereas the purple, it's not really, because it's oil-based. So you kind of can see a cool effect start coming out. Well, actually, and the green. The green is also oil. So you can see that you can start getting a really cool effect even just with this in itself. Let me adjust this real quick. Now, I'm going to go in with the marker a little bit to kind of bring the picture fully out, and then we'll start painting, okay? And the idea of this is that we always work forward, that even if a mark is perceived as permanent, so we're using literally a permanent marker, that would be considered an additive because you can't subtract from it because it's permanent. But when we're using paint, you can subtract from it by covering it with paint. So now you can use that as an additive. And then if you want to, we can go one further and we can subtract again by scraping. So that's what I'm going to show you for this next step in the next process. Now, back to the art, what I grew up doing. So I went to Schiller Park and learned how to do art. You know, that would be studio art. So that would include, you know, painting, ceramics, all that kind of fun stuff. Then what happened was that I got bit by the comic book bug. And when I was like 11 years old, then I was like, oh, I want to draw comics now. So I have these like two different careers. One is drawing and painting, and the other one's comic book illustration. So I also do comics for a living. I'm currently contracted with Abrams, the book publisher, and we're working on a graphic novel.
Oh, do you use your lav? Technical difficulty. The microphone fell off, but we'll be right back. If you're just tuning in, this is Bryan Moss.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I got hooked. So, I am working on a graphic novel called Eightfold Path with Abrams Books. And so, I have these two different worlds where I exhibit art and paintings, and I make comics for a living. So, it's pretty fun because it allows me to, if I get exhausted of doing one thing, then I can jump into another one.
So being somebody that's not visual art is not my art. Mm-hmm. Like, when you say comics, drawing, and painting, I think of that as the same thing. And obviously
really?
It's not, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
What are the differences there? Like,
yeah, so I would say that the differences, or the things that, the nuances, so you can read like a painted graphic novel, right? So people do paint in comics, meaning that they will do a watercolor-based comic, gouache, even acrylics. Not many oil-painted comics, at least I've never come across. That would be pretty ambitious. And so, but most of the time, if you're an illustrator, you'll dabble or you'll play with the idea of painting, but it's usually not like a career. You know, it's so an illustrator will typically work in like, you know, pins, Sumi ink, India ink, those kind of materials, Copic markers, and they're pretty dedicated. But when you deal with a painter, obviously their narrative is exclusively to like a canvas. So I would say that is the two different distinctive differences would be that. But there's a little bit of cross-pollination. But for me, you won't see me doing a painting style like the way I paint won't appear in a comic. It's very different styles. With comics, it's more, I would say, less experimental, because when you're telling a story, you don't want to compromise that space, versus, because you don't want to lose your reader, versus painting, you want to. You know, you want the viewer to get lost in the painting, look at the nuances, create a story for themselves, those kind of things. So I would say those are like two of the fundamental differences between the two. Now, What you're going to see me do with this technique, like I said, we're going to go back to the scraping. And what this technique does, it allows you to cover a lot of canvas pretty quickly. Okay, so you'll see it's just a silicone wedge, nothing special. You can use cardboard. You can use anything for this.
That's just the class change, Bill, but there's no students here. So. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so what you're seeing is just kind of like, and this is the liberating part about painting. Now, a lot of artists, like I said, they'll push the canvas this far. They'll do creative things like this. No problem. But what I want to get into the artist's mind, obviously, like students, the people, the person, the audience, the target demographic I'm talking to right now is like your junior, senior artist here who's going to go into art school. Usually the artist at that age, they have this like idea of like drawing realism that's very technical, it's very tight. And so what I want them to see is that it will liberate them. This will give you a little bit of freedom to play and to have fun with the piece. Because you don't have to create a statement every time. Like this canvas I bought cost $3. So it's a little bit more expensive than a piece of paper. So you can afford to experiment a little bit. And by experimenting, what that allows you to do, it gives you a space to where you can actually come up with new ideas, new concepts, and even new narrative. So you can start seeing where my pastel and my color is mixing. Now, with that happening, if the color gets muddy and really gross, you want to get away from that as far as possible. But I kind of like this gray that it's creating, so what I'm going to do is actually use this gray color to create the contour of my shape around my character.
Now, is that gray color, is it a surprise to you? Were you expecting that? Okay.
No, that's like, and that's those like happy little accidents, right? So what happens is that I'm considered like a tube painter. And what that means is that I'm taking from the tube, putting it on my palette, and then I'm just laying down color. You have tube painters, and then you have people who paint, who are palette painters. A palette painter is somebody who mixes their colors down on the palette and then puts it on there. So, and I jump between the two processes. But with this, I usually end up mixing my colors on canvas, and this is a good example of that. So you can take that all the way through, and this goes back to, like I was saying, with like the idea of mixing the media together and experimenting. Now, as parts dry, other things might be revealed. And so the other point that I would like to share with the artist, or anyone who's even watching this, the idea that you can have a drawing and a painting at the same time. So even though we're laying down paint, and technically this is a painting, there's enough drawing coming out, that's coming out the sides, that will permeate through here, that you can also draw back into it and bring out that illustration. And that's a distinction a lot of times that artists forget that they're allowed to do. So it's one of those things where I just want to remind you and give artists permission that they can experiment, and it doesn't have to be a fully rendered painting. If you go to any museum and like to look at the art collections, you're going to find paintings there that are anywhere between a painting and a drawing. They don't have to be this lush rendering. So a lot of times what happens when you paint, there's a few things that you want to keep in mind. So there is intention behind the color. I'm just not willy-nilly making random colors. So what I'm going to do, you see this big purple part here. The complementary color to purple is obviously yellow. So we're going to put back some yellow into this to kind of balance the painting. So what I'm going to do is, with this purple up here, we're going to make the blouse or whatever, we're going to make that yellow. So that's something where I'm painting with intention. I'm not doing too much experimenting on that part. And the reason for that is because you want your painting to have a harmony. And that harmony comes within balance and complementary colors. And you can use other color schemes, obviously, but we're going with like something simple that we know that works really well, which is complementary colors. And for anyone who doesn't know what a complementary color is, look at a color wheel and you'll pick a color and then look at the color directly opposite of that. So red, green, blue, yellow, those kind of things.
Can I ask a silly question?
Yeah, for sure.
Why are they complementary?
Actually, for knowing as much art that I know, I do not know the answer to that. But what I'm going to do is take a crack at it anyway. So art, the greatest artist ever is always going to be nature, okay? So we, as artists, we get a lot of information from nature. So when you look into the sky, and let's say you're looking through, or no, let's use a different example. Let's say you're looking at the ground, and you're looking at roses, let's say. Inherently, you start to see the connotation of like, red and green just from nature, right? And those are the kind of things that deliver the message. And the reason I say that is because there seems to be a natural harmony that always is revealed in nature. And those kind of things we're inherent to because we look at things all the time. So that is like more of a, hippie kind of answer. But I'm sure there's a scientific reason for that too that I just don't know the answer to.
It's not that. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where you're just, because as an artist you have to have a sympathetic eye. The idea is to like be able to look, be patient, let things come out, reveal themselves, let things, those are all things you find in nature, or all processes you find in nature. So at this point you can kind of see that we're doing like colors that are kind of like wild and radical. We do have our neutral, which is this gray. And the reason you want to, a lot of people, when they look at my art, they think I use a lot of colors. Typically, I only use about 3 to 5 colors. But what happens is that I'm using a neutral tone for the back, which makes everything pop and push forward pretty hard. And then I'm using big shapes also. So by doing that, that's how I'm getting like these big, bold ideas. And you can see all this is just shaping. I technically haven't painted any figurative work yet. I just drew it, So we're going to do a little bit of painting now. Hopefully, let's see how talented I am if I can mix and make brown out of this palette I have here. I think I got it.
Nice.
Yeah, I got it.
So I've got a question from Miss Holm.
Yep.
Hi, Miss Holm.
Hi, Miss Holm. How are you?
She sent me a message on GChat, and going back to the happy accidents.
Yeah.
So Miss Holm, and for those of you that don't know, Miss Holm is our one of our visual art teachers, and she asked in general how much is planned and how much is happy accidents.
I would argue that every happy accident is not planned, and the reason I say that is because a technique I typically bomb at that I don't do well at, I'll show it to you right now, is a thing where you like dual paint. It's where you dip 2 colors and then you paint, right? So I'll show you now. Now this would be like a fluke. Let's say like this would be a happy accident that I did with intention that actually worked. I'm just going to do like a pattern on the shirt, okay? So this is like I don't think this looks good at all. I think this looks really awful. So that's an example of like me attempting a happy accident and it doesn't work. So for me personally, all my happy accidents like literally happen organically. It's always serendipitous. There's never a planned moment for it, Like sometimes I'll like mark the face and it will look real. And I'm like, well, my job's done here. But often, I'm sitting here rendering, trying to figure out how to make the face look a certain way. So yeah, I would say all of my happy accidents are purely just like coincidence and phenomenons, which is why I still paint. That's what makes me want to paint still. That's why I get up and go to the studio. That's like one of the things that drive me.
I hate using the word talented, but like...
That's fine.
Do you think that the more talented an artist or visual artist is, the more likely they are to have happy accidents rather than not happy accidents?
Actually, that's a really good question.
Because I ask because I've never had a happy accident in my entire life in terms of visual art.
Yeah, I would say the artist who is more like who has like, because there is an aptitude. I wouldn't say that it's like an inherent ability that like somehow some artist is better than another, but there are artists who like get it earlier, right? So we would consider those artists talented. With that type of artist, I think they're less likely to experiment. So I think they would have less of that phenomenon or that happy accident. I think that they would actually be really conservative when they create because there's a lot of responsibility to it. Okay, now I would argue that this is a happy accident forming. Because what happened here is that we took that terrible thing I tried to do. I don't know why I tried to do that, but it was to prove a point. But what happened here is that now we have this really cool blouse for our portrait. I don't know how the audience feels at home about it, but I think it's pretty cool personally. And these are the kind of things that are liberating, Ben, when you create and paint. The idea or the ability to, we're not going to do that again, to learn and to take something you failed at and take another stab at it and then nail it. So with this character that we're painting, this portrait, which is completely out of my head, I just made this up. I think this right here is my favorite part of the painting because it is the most like abstracted part of it. And that's the fun part about painting too, is that you can create those kind of things. It's liberating. Like I said, you don't really need permission to experiment as long as it has your harmony still within the painting.
What do you mean by that?
As long as your composition is there. So from when we first started and we looked at this whole scenario, this whole scheme, we established that the painting, the weight of the painting was going to be from here down. So that means is that the viewer's eye, first when they look at it, they might like come into this really big color right here. But then you can see how it disseminates with like the yellow earrings and then down to this part, this like flowery top. And then we balance that with the complementary color. So that's what kind of gives us our composition. That gives us our foundation. And that's what actually gives us the confidence to like experiment more. So that's what I mean by like establishing those things to allow the experimentation to happen. It's
interesting, to use the word harmony. Mm-hmm. That's a really cool word to use.
Yeah, it works out really well because and that's what you're looking for, because when the viewer looks at a piece of art or a painting, that's what they're looking for, some sort of like something calming or something exciting, right? So what I'm going to do now is balance this entire painting. So we have, like I said, this gray, this negative space back here, so that we're going to like make this asymmetrical, which is nothing more than, I know I'm using like really technical words right now, guys. Not that they're big words, but just pretty technical. So right here is where we're going to paint up for the background, but we're going to use bright, bold colors because why not have fun? That's what we built this entire painting now, so that we can have fun. And that's what you're going to see. So we're just going to use this awesome magenta color to crop. And it was funny, guys, because when I first started painting this was just going to be a hat, a big purple hat. but now it's kind of like an afro. So that would be like another happy accident to where it's like a lot of fun. Now, the thing I'm doing here now is it's a dry brush, so it's not wet. It's kind of hard, actually. And what I'm going for right now is texture. So you can see there's a little bit of texture down here. Well, actually, there's a lot of texture down there. And then we're going to balance it up here. We're going to do the same, but we're going to make it like, and this is called like directional flow. This is where you want to control the viewer's eye. So when I paint it this way, like just whatever marking that is. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to go inward here. So that we have that harmony once again, and it makes it uniform, which makes it symmetrical from left to right, and then asymmetrical from top to bottom, which is the beauty of making portraits, is that that's what you're trying to get every time. So back to my history, like my story. So when I turned like 18, I was going to go to art school. Didn't go because I couldn't afford it. I was poor. And then I got an agent out of LA, so I started doing commercial work, nationally, which is a lot of fun. But what happened was that when I was doing work nationally, this would have been the early 2000s, I didn't really have a connection to Columbus or the art scene here. I was pretty much invisible. And so what happened is that I wanted to be more involved. And this was around the time that 400 West Rich Street opened. So there's a lot more events and stuff going on. So then that's when I became more active. And then GCAC started a campaign called Art Makes C-Bus. And then I was part of that I still am part of that campaign. But that is what kind of like drove me more into like community. And then now, like, that's all I do. So it's like volunteering, philanthropy, donating time, all that stuff. Teaching. So it's a lot of fun. So I would, just as like advice to people, there's not a law to where you have to work, that you can work exclusively national or local. You can do it all. But working locally has given me most of my, like, my desire to keep, working, and drives me to be more creative. So it's definitely the motivating factor, because when I worked nationally, I would create products and then I would see my product in the store, but there's no name attached to it. It wasn't mine. So there wasn't much anything there. Versus working locally, you'll see people, you can talk to them, there's a connection, all those kind of things. So keep that in mind. Don't feel that you have to leave your city to become like a well-known artist or a famous artist. You can just live here and do your thing. So we'll do the face now, and then we'll wrap up this painting.
So what do you think? I mean, so you like being here in Columbus?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely, the benefit about Columbus as an artist, the cool thing is that you can travel super cheap and super easy. So you can actually go, Chicago, New York, LA, super cheap. So technically you can still work from Columbus and travel, and the affordability. And so a lot of that is why I stay here, is because I can just commute, But also, it's definitely like, it's not true. You don't have to move somewhere to get like work. You can, if your art is strong enough and you have strong enough discipline, and if you're like socially intelligent, so you can communicate well, you can get jobs. It's not hard to get a job with any of these companies if you can communicate well and draw well. And a lot of people, you don't have to draw. You don't have to be the best artist. You just have to draw halfway decent. So, yeah, you can be based out of Columbus and still get national and international work. It's super easy. But it just seems like it's impossible because being here in the Midwest, you always feel ignored, which is not the case at all.
Do you think that, so the coronavirus pandemic is going on, like, do you see that affecting the visual art world at all, or anything that you kind of are a part of that could change?
Yeah, I would say the cool thing about it that actually, and I like what got choked up about this, is that there was a heavy donors campaign to the GCAC for emergency funds for artists. And so artists who applied and qualified, they got anywhere from I think it was $100 to $1,000, which is really cool to see that the city supports the artists that way. So that was one of those things that flabbergasted me at first, where I was like, oh wow, Columbus, they really do care, So that was the initial, response. Now we're going into the idea that they may not be able to pay rent. Artists live month to month. And so, to me, I always feel that as an artist, a lot of it is innovation, and that innovation even becomes down to making money. So how do you shift that? So now artists, a big part of a problem with artists is that they don't have a lot of viewers on the internet because everyone's at school doing something. So now it kind of creates a platform, right? Because everyone's at home, everyone's on the computer now. So it actually, if you look at it from that perspective as an artist, there's a lot of potentials in that. And I've personally seen, people, they say to me oh, hey Bryan, let me know if you need any help, or anything, because there's a sympathetic ear here in Columbus to artists because, people like you guys, GCAC, everyone, there's been a understanding in the conditioning to the public where they understand the value of arts here in Columbus now. So, the museum, CCAD, Columbus State, anywhere that promotes and teaches art and gives artists an access to display their art, it all works in the favor. So
what I think we're all realizing now is we're stuck in our homes. I mean, what do? We do
right.
art. Or we watch art. Or
exactly.
We consume art. And whether it's TV or whether it's music, and I think that it's... And even me being somebody that's been an advocate for arts for some time, it's still kind of alarming to realize that when everything is taken away, the one thing, we still have that art. And it's even, for me, it's kind of a realization.
That's well said. And it kind of gives once again, it kind of creates that there's a value, there's a sincere value now to that. And there's a gratefulness that people probably experience. So that's actually well said because, besides, truck drivers at this point, artists are they rose to the surface, as a very high value. So I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that there's a understanding of that out there.
Absolutely.
But I don't think that there's been much of a change for artists outside of having to figure out how to package an item now and ship it. I would say that's their biggest problem at this point. But I think in months to come, if things start drying up, then there will be problems. But if it's only for a couple months, I think it's a good time for people to learn about the value of artists.
So to go back to your painting for a second, I'm amazed at how the three colors on the top, the blue, that purple, and I forget what color you said that pinkish was.
The magenta kind of pink color.
So to me, again, as an amateur, those three colors look so beautiful together. At what point in your process right there did you realize that you were going to put that blue?
The point where I realized I was going to do that was, you mean this blue right here?
Yeah.
Sorry. Was what I noticed is that these two colors right here, the purple and magenta, they're very close together. They kind of, they're obviously like distinct different, but there's nothing that makes it radiant because those are closer together than, let's say, blue and magenta. So in the same way, and then blue and orange are complementary colors. So the blue's intention was to complement the orange face, but then when I saw that it was making that brighter, then that's when I took it all the way there. Once again, going to creating that directional flow to create those shapes. The green I put there to complement the pink, the magenta, so it's green and red. But I just don't like using green and red because you think of Christmas. So that was my intention behind that. Now,
Miss Holm also asked another question real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was also thinking, so how are you using the underdrawing to guide the face at this point?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. So the risk you take in this painting, and with any painting when it comes to using, activating your canvas with oil pastels, or markers, is that there comes a point where you're going to go blind, and that's where you cover the face up, for me personally. So yeah, no, there is no guide. It's gone. You just have to trust the process, and you have to go for it. But what you can do, and here's the thing, a lot of people, they feel that when they jump into the painting part that they have to do it correctly, like they have to get the face correct. But like I said, we're using, and at this point I'm going to stop painting and go back into the piece of art with the dry material, the marker, the pastel, and the oil pastel. So what you can do to bring out, because that face, it works, but it's pretty you could tell it's just kind of like a outline for a face. So there's a few things you can do, because like I said, we went in blind. We covered it up, and we just painted. I'm treating the paint as an outline, as a sketch now. So I'm going to go in. We'll see how dry it is. So I'm going to test it with my wedge right here on the side. It's pretty dry. It's kind of dry there. Yeah, okay. So what I can do, let's say that I wanted to create a mouth. I have the mouth established, the upper lip and the lower lip. I'm going to use my wedge to carve into it. So even though it's just one simple line, that's a drawing technique. So we're going back in with drawing techniques, right? Let's say that we want to kind of create an eye. And we'll keep it super simple so that if we mess up, it's easy to fix at this point. So you're now drawing again, okay? But a lot of people don't consider this drawing because they're using paint. So it's a psychological hurdle. You have to get past that. Now you can do things called flourishes and embellishments. And what those are is where you kind of create busyness around the work. And you do that in order to either distract the viewer, to balance the composition, or to pull certain things out that you can't with paint or a brush. Now, technically, I could do it with paint, in a brush, but, the whole point of this is to use different media. So we're just going to bring some of this stuff out, because now we can break our flow because we established it. So our directional flow is like that. So we can do these cool markings now. Why not? It's cool. It's you're allowed to do cool stuff on your painting. So as you can see, I'm going to bring out the skin tone with the same pastel. And you can see there, I somehow scraped into it and messed up the painting, so she has a cut on her lip now. So I'm going to wrap up this painting in about 5 minutes, Ben, if that works. Are we good on time, sir?
Yeah, we're perfect on time.
Okay, cool. So I'll just go ahead and do... Now, see, that would be considered a happy accident because now our lip has a highlight on it from where I accidentally marked on it. So...
As you're finishing, I have a question about the Eightfold Path.
Yeah.
So that's the name of the graphic novel you're writing?
Mm-hmm.
Can you,
Yep.
I'm intrigued by the title.
Yeah, so the concept behind the book is that there's 8 different characters, 8 different walks of life, and the story comes together at the very end. Like, so it shows, like, how, at this point, it's the idea that everyone has different walks of life, but we're all the same. So that's the generic, the elevator pitch for it. Obviously, it gets a lot deeper than that, but and it's working in a style of like old school comics from the 50s. If anyone remembers EC comics, they're kind of like the horror comics, Mad Magazine from back in the day. It's working in that style, so it's going to have a lot of like old school sensibilities, which would be a lot of fun. And the difference between like old school comics and new school is that the old ones were like heavy in rendering, so they were like very laborious with inking. So we're going to explore some of that, and then, but it's going to have a contemporary sensibility. So it's going to be, new compositions and new designs. They're not going to be antiquated. So, yeah, that's the idea behind that. It's about 220 pages, and it will be out spring of 2022. So.
Oh, wow. So it takes a while to do.
Yeah.
I'm getting some requests online to zoom in closer on the picture.
Yeah, so I can pretty much wrap it up so they can see the finished piece if the internet community is interested.
Yeah. So as we're kind of zooming in, even it's amazing how like in the last 3 minutes you've done. So it's almost like you're stepping back, you're looking at it, and then like, what is there a way to describe your thought process as like kind of as you're touching it up right here?
Yeah. So what happens is that when you're on the final stretch of the painting, what you want to do is so a lot of times you'll see artists step back and they'll like do that little art thing, you know. So when you're doing that, or you're stepping back and looking, what you're doing is you're collapsing the image. So it's kind of like the equivalent of like if you wear glasses, you take off your glasses and look at a painting. Because when you're up close, you're just paying attention to the details and stuff like that. But when you back up, it's kind of like you're seeing something that's super far away. And what I'm looking for when I do that is if everything is distinct. So does a face look like a face? So it's like when I step back, I'm like, well, she needs some eyebrows. I don't want her to be crazy. So it's like, we're going to give her some eyebrows. So then I'll step back now. Let's say I don't like how that cuts off right there. So I don't like that shoulder because I think it should be there, personally. So we'll go into marker and do that. Step back. That reads better to me. But I feel that line now is pretty bold. So I'm going to push that line all the way down so that the viewer knows to follow that their eye should go all the way down here. So I'm just giving directions for the viewer on how to look. And that's the intention of everything now, so that it all has a harmony, it all works together. I find this part to be very satisfying. I find this to be satisfying, but I feel this part to be a little barren. So the next technique I'm going to do, super simple, super quick. I'll try not to be messy, guys. Is just a little bit of splatter. And the reason for that is to kind of like to make a space active without controlling it. So that means when the
You don't have to worry about getting, like,
Okay.
decorate our new television set with
Okay,
paint.
cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And like I said, I'm not a messy painter, but it's just like, So yeah, so when doing this, that right there, something that simple, is just to like balance this active space to this active space. If you wanted to go further, and this would be the last technique I show you guys, you can do like a drip. These are kind of things that make it look like that the paint's not controlled. So that is if I wasn't going in with like a brush and trying to make it perfect, You could do something like this to give it,
So
kind of like
for
its
that?
own.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, so it's like it's just activating it once again. And then you can subtract. Just going back in, wiping. And that works too. So when you're doing a painting, you don't have to, going back to the original point, you don't have to commit to anything. You can just work on something. It doesn't have to be, I'm painting this mark, then this mark, then this mark. It's like, no, it's a full process.
And is everything a technique? And I guess what I mean by that is even the wiping that you just did. Because if
that's a heavy technique. So
and that's something you just practice. I mean, you just do it over and over again until
Because what the example of that and the fun thing about it is that with scrubbing, you can lay down something that, let's say like that. And that's basically suicidal in a painting. Why would you do that? But if you're doing it to scrub, then it's like a really cool technique. So you're subtracting. And it creates kind of like a halo effect, right, guys? Like a feathering. So you can get a nice... So now it's kind of like she has like a peafowl or peacock kind of like headpiece, So you can... so subtracting is a heavy technique in painting. So, and you can do it all day. So yeah, I'll go ahead and sign it. I hope everybody enjoyed it. If there's any more questions, Ben, that's fine. You just let me know.
Is there a background story to your hat?
Yeah, so I'm recognizable in public. That's all. But the background is actually, it's kind of funny. So I have like a lot of hair like on my head, right, where hair goes. And what happens is that it's distracting. So if I'm like teaching or like in public, people like try to touch it. So I wear a hat to like kind of create a uniform and also to like keep my hair in so that people don't get distracted by it. So sorry, the answer is kind of lame, but it's more for function than anything.
It's not lame. And actually, your first reason, it actually works because I don't think we've ever met before, but I do recognize you. And it's probably because of the hat.
It's funny. She has the same kind of vibe. It's like the circle. Yeah. It's like reinforcing that,
Yeah.
Awesome. So was there any more questions or anything?
Let's see. Let me look online real quick.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions, type them into the chat box real quick. Looks like we got to all of them.
Okay, cool. Perfect.
Any last words you want to say? Maybe even maybe a good last question would be, so we've got probably 100 visual art students that are sitting at home, not only away from the art studio here, but they might not have the materials that they're used to having and being able to work with. Mm-hmm. So do you have any advice or any...
Yeah, for sure. You can make art with anything, first off. And that you can... So the things that you have around your house that you would use for art, think about them in different ways. like we explored today, we explored adding and subtracting, and things that have permanence, such as markers, when you don't even see the marker anymore. So you can use other mediums that would be considered additives also as subtractors for other permanent objects. So that's one example. But also for something more practical, let's say that all you have maybe is like you have old fingernail polish. If you have fingernail polish remover, then you have an oil watercolor set. So you can like think outside the box. Also, nature provides a lot, so you can use wood as sculptures. So if it's more industrial, nails, hammer, wood, or even just stacking objects in a space and creating structures or sculptures that way. Digitally, there's a lot of free apps and programs out there that you can do video editing on, stop motion animation. And so if you construct these objects, you can create a stop motion animation kind of thing. So it's more about not saying like, oh, I don't have my Copic marker, so I can't draw my manga. It's like, okay, well, what other options do you have? How can you think outside the box? How can you create something different, but still get that same satisfaction? So the idea of the expression is more important than the material. So whatever you find, you can use. So yeah, if that helps, hope so.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right, so maybe we'll close up here, and then maybe what we'll do is as we fade out into our theme song, which, by the way, our theme song now for the Deeper Connection series emergency broadcast is a song from our Glee Club. So now every day when you tune in, before we come on and after we come on, you're going to hear the Glee Club song Easier. So as we fade out into that, and maybe we'll do a little close-up view of the painting even more close, so that all of our viewers can see it at home. Thanks again to Bryan Moss. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. And I do want to say just one more time before we go off the air that the Deeper Connection series emergency broadcast is made possible by Section 12, Article M of the State of Ohio Stay-at-Home Order issued by Governor DeWine. Thank you, Governor, for all you're doing to keep us safe and allowing innovative digital learning like this to continue to take place. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Be productive. Do something fun. And we will see you here at noon tomorrow. Bye.
Just open up and let me know what I can do, 'cause all I wanna do is make it easier on you. I promise you that I'll take one last firm stand. I'll promise you we'll take a trip that's not planned. And I'll take a hold of your hand, hold you tight, watch what I do at you. 'Cause once again, my friend, I'm not in this battle to win. I'm in it 'cause you're battling me again. Let's do it, make a plan, 'cause I wanna make it easier. Just open up and let me know what I can do, 'cause all I wanna do is make it easier on you. I wanna make it, I wanna make it, I
wanna make it. I wanna make it.
I wanna make it
easier on
you.
Cause once again, my friend, I'm not in this battle